So, Paul, I think it's your turn.
Great, I'm just going to fire up the video here. It should be coming through. So just to check, can everyone basically hear me and see? Beautiful. You can already get a sense of how useful the chat box is to get a little bit of feedback from students in a large group. So we'll try and show you as much as we can. It's going to be more of a tell me than a show me presentation, unfortunately, just in terms of making sure that we get through as much content as possible. But we're going to hopefully do a little bit of showing and then have as much time as we can for Q&A. Towards the end. So just a couple of notes to start off with. Just in the presentation or the presenter notes there at the bottom of your corner. Whoops, I've now blocked you. I'm going to pull that up here. We'll talk about this little pod here, but it's very useful for just putting on-the-fly information, either capturing it or communicating it up front. So if you can just make sure your names are first name, last name, Paul Surratt, so that Nancy can, I think they want to check it against their records. So if you haven't put in your name in like that, just click the top of the attendee pod, that little menu button there, and you should be able to pick edit my information and then just put your name there. So that would be great. Yeah, I think we're going to be ready to go. There's still people streaming in, but as time is of the essence, we'll start going. So I'm going to move these presentation notes out. Yes, Najib, I agree. I should have brought my own coffee. I have water because it's a little bit hot up here in my makeshift study. So I'm going to move the presentation notes out, which is an example of how you can easily shift things around here. So first off, I just wanted to say welcome. I hope everyone is having a good summer, circumstances notwithstanding, and that you're getting into now. You're advanced in your thinking about the teaching for the fall semester. As you'll see, it's certainly a different experience. But despite everything, we had a very positive experience. So wouldn't replace the classroom, but given the crisis that we're in, it's doable. It's doable to have a very engaged participatory interaction with your students. So we're going to hopefully save you some of the errors that we made and hopefully let you learn from some of the successes that we had today. So welcome. And the other thing is a lot of what we'll talk about here isn't just Adobe Connect specific. It'll be focused on those tools, but you can use poll tools and you can use chat tools and all these things either in some of the other platforms or certainly as separate standalones. And I know that they've worked very well for some of my colleagues in other programs. So je vais faire la présentation en anglais, mais bien sûr les questions et les commentaires peuvent être en français. Je peux répondre aux questions en français si jamais ça c'est mieux. Alors dans la session Q&A, on peut communiquer comme ça. Au minimum, si tu acceptes les erreurs et l'accent anglophone. Alors, ça c'est le deal, on dit. I want to start off with, I'll talk about some of the webinar logistics to start off with, but before that, I just want to say a couple of thanks to folks. First off, a big thanks to my three TAs, two of whom are with us today. So Jocelyn Kane, Robert Marinov, and Caleb Earl. They're all incredible students, great researchers, fantastic TAs, and they have an absurd amount of knowledge on teaching digitally now. So if anyone is looking for someone with broad politics knowledge and great skills, as well as fantastic interpersonal skills and ability to work under pressure, I can strongly recommend all three of them, and particularly Jocelyn and Robert, who are with us today. Secondly, just want a quick thanks to the TLSS team. So thank you to Nancy and Jeanette for working with us to kind of shape this, and particularly to Jillian Steele, who's a digital specialist with TLSS. And she, in March or April, when I first touched base with her, took on the challenge of persuading a decidedly old school and in-person professor, so my context is I didn't allow computers into the classroom until this term, other than exceptions for learning accommodations, etc., because I wanted that face-to-face, we're looking each other in the eyes experience, which for me in political theory anyway is very important. And she managed to persuade me to look at things a little bit differently and explore both Brightspace and Adobe Connect and put in the work and have that kind of open mindset to experiment, to see what could work, as well as teaching me how to use and do a bunch of things that I wanted to do. So huge shout out of thanks to her. So I think that's all of the upfront things that I'm going to mention before we move on. So I'll just talk a little bit about the webinar logistics. Quick temperature check to make sure everyone's clear on things, and then we're going to move into it. Let's see if I can get the. Oh well, first off, let's have a little look at who we are. So let's do some of these polls here. So if you haven't already responded to the poll, please respond to the poll now. I'll give you 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's see where we're from. So, all right, the poll is, you know what, I haven't ended it yet. So the poll should be right in front of the PowerPoint screen. If you've enlarged either the video or the PowerPoint, you won't see it. So you need to close that back down. So can everyone see is there anyone who can't see the poll? Okay, looks like most people are. Okay, hi on you can't, okay. All right, there might be issues from, certainly on, I know that on the phone is a bit more challenging. On the iPad, I thought, oh, so it automatically submits, Najib, so no problem. All right, I'm gonna, and we've got the broadcast results now, so you should all see. I'm gonna end it, and this is what we see. All right, so we've got, what's the largest here? All right, arts, you are representing, although we've got 170 people signed in, so I'm not sure. This looks like about half of you were able to participate here. But on the basis of who is able to participate, we've got 27% in arts, we've got 13% health sciences, 23% in social sciences, sciences 6%, engineering, common law, civil law 5%, engineering 5%. All right, so that gives you a bit of a sense of who we are. At least in terms of our faculty. So yeah, there you go, a little faculty pride there. Okay, so I'm going to hide this then. I'm going to break out another poll here. Just give us a sense of who we are. What is your role? Are you a professor, part-time, TA, admin support staff, or other? Now you can see how this is, so sometimes I can click here and that allows you to fill it out without your participants seeing it, which is sometimes good if you want a question on a content issue where you don't want people influencing each other. I've got most of them checked as broadcast so that you can see it as it comes up. So, okay, we've got 50% part-time profs, we've got 35% professors, and we've got 5% TAs and support staff, and a couple of others. So that's a pretty good cross-section of University of Ottawa teaching-oriented folks. Let me see now just how many of you have taught distance before, distance education or online. Whoops, here we go. Now it's open. Wow. Okay, look at this. That is surprising information. Oh yeah, I kind of meant a full course, because I guess almost everyone has done it for 3 weeks at the end of last semester. So how many have done it for a full course other than in emergency circumstances in March? Yeah, you can change your vote and it'll automatically shift. Okay, there we go. Yeah, on a professional capacity. Okay, so some folks have various experience with it. Um, Great. So I'll look forward to hearing some of your feedback as well if it maps onto our experience. Oh, Lachlan, I know it's a hard life when you're on sabbatical and you don't have any of the COVID stress, um, at least in teaching. Okay, great. So yes, distance courses is anywhere where you need a kind of digital component to it. All right, let me take one last one here. Just out of interest, I found that phrasing polls with the students in a slightly tongue-in-cheek way often got kind of engaged them a bit more. So I've taken that to heart here. How are you feeling about teaching online? Stressed to the gills, given the new learnings and home situation and everything else. Mildly concerned. It's going to be a pain, but it'll get done. Neutral, it's just fine. Or it's going to be fantastic. I can teach in my shorts. All right, let's see here where we're at. All right, that's not too bad. I think that probably, as we'll see, is not too far off how the student body is feeling. Students have faced a bit more challenges, at least in our courses, in their survey responses, but interesting. I would have put myself in the spring in the mildly concerned, maybe slightly more than mildly. It was a lot to juggle, but I figured I could do it. It was way more work than I thought. So we'll get to that, but absolutely worth it in terms of the students' learning outcomes and their appreciation in terms of feeling like they were in class as much as possible. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of sense of polls. We'll come back to the later. One other comment about kids. Yes. On the flip side, I have a 3-year-old son, and he's currently in a full-on operatic singing mode. He loves to sing French, 19th century French folk tunes, it seems. So he would come on almost every day and just sing to his heart's content. And I have to say, he, as predictable, became the star of the courses. So it's something I'll come back to in the end, but it made a big difference to open up informally to the class. I showed them a picture of my makeshift home office, which was a disaster. It was half painted. There was nothing in it except for tools. Let them into my life with Belmont a little bit, and it really bridged the gap there. So there's some advantages, and I definitely would say do not be afraid of being a bit more informal in that side, and having empathy with and allowing them to have empathy with you in terms of the challenging circumstances under which we're working. So yeah, on that front, it was a beautiful experience. Tons of students said that was the thing they looked forward to the most, just in terms of the entertainment kind of joyfulness creating moment. So, okay, that's a bit of a longer start than I thought, but there it is. Couple of things about the webinar logistics. So we are recording the webinar, and recording and the PowerPoint document will be shared following the session. We might also do an FAQ based on the Q&As, which I'll talk about in a minute. Point 2, unfortunately, unlike my class and the topic of this discussion, this webinar is going to be very lecture heavy as opposed to participation oriented. The PowerPoint is super dense, so apologies for that. The goal is to get as much information across as possible, but also let those who are not participating kind of read the PowerPoint and be able to engage this material as much as possible, even if they couldn't be here. So that's that. In terms of which tools to use for what, we're already deep into the chat, so that's fantastic. We'll talk about how to use it, some of the drawbacks, some of the positives. And yes, Agnes, the learnings will be transferable, I think, to other platforms. Some of them are specific to Adobe, but many of them are more about just how to use a chat function, which you use in Zoom, which you use in Microsoft Teams, which you can use separate tools to do. Same with polls. I have a colleague who taught on Zoom but had chat and polls as separate things that students need to come up with, as well as idea maps and word clouds, and they apparently work fantastically. In terms of how we organize which tools to do what kind of tasks, the Q&A pod, if you've got a question you'd like answered, please put it in the Q&A pod. It's the easiest way for us to keep track of them. Questions get lost very quickly in the chat. So if you want one that we answer, put it in the Q&A pod. We may answer it in real time, low likelihood. We may answer it in written form in real time and broadcast it to the whole group. Nancy and Jocelyn and Robert will be looking at those. Or we may save them for the end and then answer them after the session, either in the Q&A session or after the session in terms of sending out an FAQ. So the Q&A pod, if you have specific questions that you want answered, really use that. The Q&A pod is on the left-hand side of you, left-hand side, I think, under me, under the video. It says Q&A, and you should just be able to type in the bottom of it, and that'll add a question. No one will be able to see it except for the hosts. And when we respond, then we can choose whether it goes either to the individual or to the whole group. So put your questions in there, line them up. We will get to them as we can. If you have an immediate thing in the moment, you're welcome to put it in chat, but don't be surprised if we don't respond to it, because there's A, I'm going to be broadcasting too much, and B, it disappears quickly. That said, David, yes, I'm hoping Belmont. He's out now enjoying the outdoors, as we all should be. But he may come in and burst into song. So we'll see. Or he might be incredibly timid, shy. So we'll see. Okay, so public chat for informal conversations, like you've got here. Private chat, you can send private chat messages to us if you like, or other participants. I would say if you want something specific answered in a moment, you can send one to Nancy. She'll be monitoring that. In my class, yes, I had at least one TA monitoring the chat and engaging with the chat and the Q&A. In terms of private chat, you click on the chat box, you click the menu and you pull it down. It will say start chat with. And then you can either choose public chat, which is the default, or you can put host or participant, and you should be able to find Nancy there, Carol. And then raised hand, we'll use that. If you look at the top of your menu bar, there should be a little person waving. It's a raised hand, obviously. And you've got a few different options there. You can raise a hand, agree, disagree, step away, speak louder, speak softer. Oh, who's here? Oh, qui est là? Tu veux dire bonjour? No. Oh, no. Okay. You know what? I'm speaking to my colleagues. Est-ce que tu veux? Oh, mon Dieu. Qu'est-ce que c'est? Oh, Hermance. Oh, mon Dieu. Do you want to say hi? I'm teaching some of the other teachers at the university.
I don't want it.
Est-ce que tu es un peu timide? Do you want to sing?
No.
No. Okay. Can you just say bye-bye?
I want to sing.
You want to sing? Okay. All right. One quick song, and then we're going to have to... yeah, Joel, he's totally available. What do you want to sing?
London Bridge falling down.
Or say.
London Bridge.
Okay, give it a shot.
London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady. The big pig will save the day, save the day.
This is new.
Save the day. Super pig will save the day, save the day, the day. Now the monster he has gone, he has gone, he has gone. Now the monster he has gone, my fair lady.
Oh, merci, Belmont. Oh, look, they're all clapping. They're saying bravo, bravo. Thanks, love. Mwah.
I don't hear them.
Oh, I know. They're just doing it on the... See, they're using letters to do that. Okay, love. I need to get back and talk to my colleagues. Do you want to say au revoir?
Au revoir.
Okay. Thanks, love. I have to close the door here. Oh.
No, don't.
Oh, I have to close the door. That's going to be too loud. Okay, thanks, love. I'll see you in a little while. All right, there you go. That is real time. That's what life is like. So, but the upside is that students really enjoyed those elements, and they found it. You know, it's important to do as much as you can to break up rhythms and flows. in teaching, at least I found, because everyone gets a bit of screen exhaustion. So anyway, there we go. So raised hand, we'll talk about that. And last thing, we'll focus mostly on the bigger picture questions about how to leverage strategies here. If you've got more technical questions, throw them in the Q&A pod, but we may respond to them later. Okay, so does that make sense just to everyone in terms of basic flow? Oh, right, yes. So what I should have noted is Adobe Connect is definitely a webinar mode, not a video conferencing. So it's about broadcasting, and then you allow participants to have mic and video access, but that's the exception, as opposed to Zoom or FaceTime or whatever, or Skype, which is a video conferencing tool. Okay, so seems like everyone is relatively clear with where we're at. So a couple of things of basis of the material presented. So what we're talking about today, it's a synthesis of our experience in these two classes in spring, but it's not grounded in, nor is it assessed against the scholarly literature on distance learning. So especially some of our colleagues from education, I'm sure there might be one or two things that I say that are true in our experience, but they're not more generally true. So you might wince. If there's anything that you have feedback on, please throw it in both the Q&A and the chat immediately. The idea of this is to share our experience, things that worked for us, things that didn't. Take it for what it is. It's based in, we did extensive real-time analysis and evaluation of the courses after every class. So after every class, I and the TAs debriefed and evolved every class. And then we did an extensive end-of-course synthetic evaluation, which eventually created a 25-page document of our key learnings. We also did a end-of-course student survey. So after the marks were all official, so there wasn't any concern about feedback, we sent them a survey on Brightspace, just about, not about teaching or content, but just about the tools and their experience of it. And we got an over 50% response rate, even though it was a month and a half after classes were finished. So it gave us some pretty interesting results that we'll talk about today. And yeah, Valerie, if there's a lot of interest, I would be able to share the synthesis document. I'd probably have to, both Robert, Jocelyn, and I worked on it, and I'd probably have to tweak it a little bit. But yeah, it goes into a lot of detail about very specifically what worked and what didn't. So if there's interest there, we'd be happy to tweak that and then have that sent out as well. Finally, we talked about this material with the TLSS stuff and colleagues, TLSS staff and other colleagues with distance learning experience. So there it is. It's not, we're not going to peer review publish this, that's for sure, but we're sharing it in case it's useful. But thanks for the shout out, Michael. I think it is useful. Well, you'll tell us if it's useful or not, but we were certainly interested in what we found. So, all right, so we're going to move forward here. What was the context? And Lachlan, I see your hand raised there. If you've got a critical issue, do you want to throw it in the chat box? I'll watch for it. Context. So teaching spring 2020 COVID necessitated virtual learning environment. We taught two courses. I taught two courses, POL 3102. Okay, thanks, Lachlan. Third year course. It's a mandatory course, obligatory course. It's in political thought. So I guarantee you, it's not the student's most favorite, thing in the world to do a theory course in spring that's mandatory. 90 students, lecture format. In the spring, we had 3-hour classes twice a week. I had 2 TAs in the third year course, and most of the students were taking multiple courses. Most, at least 2, a good chunk 3, and some even 4. So I don't know how they did it, but and then we had a 4th year course, which is very different. 4th year optional course, advanced seminar on applied political ethics. There were 50 students there as a seminar format, so very different than the lecture format. One TA, Robert was the TA for that. Same thing, including some overlapping classes. Our assumption was that the biggest challenge was going to be to keep student focus and attention during the full class, given the 3-hour and the screen fatigue and everything else. as well as COVID challenges. So the goal was, our response idea was, all right, how can we create as participatory an environment as possible? A characteristic of the in-person versions of these classes that I give. So that was the goal, and the format we chose was synchronous distance learning, which meant real-time lectures in the scheduled class hours. We used Adobe Connect for that. We used Brightspace for a few other things, and Zoom for a few other things, which I'll discuss. So some of the key takeaways. They're not necessarily the most important ones, but some of the ones that I think are relevant. One, Adobe Connect, like distance learning in my view, is no substitute for in-person learning. Students preferred in-person, instructors preferred in-person. That said, students performed incredibly well. I had my courses loaded up with potential bonus marks because I thought it was going to be very hard for the students. The opposite turned out to be true. They did incredibly well. Attendance was incredibly strong. Participation was incredibly strong. They really put in the work in the assignments and were really engaged. So the performance was really good, and they reported high levels of satisfaction in our survey, which we'll talk about, especially taking into account the COVID context. So not a replacement, but in the context, I was very surprised at what both we and the students could do. So conclusion, it is possible to create a highly participatory environment, even in a large lecture class, using distance learning. On the flip side, in some ways there's more participation opportunities, that is, but it's not at all clear that the quality is better, that what you get. So you really have to manage the tools and use them in the way that find out what's the best way to use, because information overload and loss of focus is very, very easy to run into with all of the different pods that are here. Another thing, it really takes in a significant amount of extra work to, not so much to learn the tools, but definitely to redesign the course, especially once you take into account the tweaking that's necessary as you go along, and way more energy. As you can probably guess, I'm a fairly high emoter when I lecture, but I found that I needed to do 200% of the emoting to make the class feel like it was engaging as normal. A couple of other things. Adobe Connect is not a video conferencing. Like I said, it's a webinar broadcast. So for a seminar format with less than 30, I would definitely use a video conferencing platform. But for a larger class, it's an excellent option. Not perfect, far from perfect, but it's an excellent option. Three other things we'll talk about is there are a very large percentage of students are facing genuinely difficult COVID-influenced challenges that significantly impacted their studies. So it's really important to keep that front of mind when designing and running courses. It's not teaching as usual in any sense. And the more we plan for that and the more we're empathetic to that, I think the better it is. Secondly, expect that various things you plan on working will not work and that you'll need to tweak it. So plan on that and explain it explicitly to the students up front to make sure that they don't view the syllabus as a legal contract in the same way that some of them often do. We'll talk about how we set the ethos and expectations towards the end of the presentation, but we made it very, very clear that there would be change and that we needed to adopt a mindset and a kind of ethos to accept that. And last thing, everything takes longer. And everything requires more explicit and clear communication than you think. Everything takes way longer, and everything requires far more explicit and clear communication than you think. So streamline and optimize the structure of your course, and assume that at most you'll be able to do 75% of what you would normally do. I mean, it took us basically 2 weeks of a 6-week teaching schedule to clarify all of the major questions with the syllabus. And I was super clear, and I had a 35-page syllabus that outlined all of the issues. So yes, they were live and synchronous. So I'm going to be happy to share the syllabus. Again, treat it for what it is. We tweaked it throughout the course, and by the end, it's pretty close to what I would use again. But things like having an explicit discussion of chat etiquette and breakout etiquette, these are all things that students don't know, that are influenced by the text nature of it, and there is a certain Twitter effect, as I'll talk about. So we have to teach them. It's important to remember, students don't even know where the doorknob is to get into the class. Like, I had to contact 3 different people to figure out, were they going to be informed? If so, how? Who's going to get them the link, et cetera, et cetera. Everything takes longer. Everything takes longer. So those are some of the key takeaways. I'm not going to talk about this too much, but here's an overview of the tools and strategies that we used for each different kind of component of the course. So what we used to lecture, what students used to participate in the lectures, what they used in the breakouts, what we used for the discussion groups, office hours, keeping track of the accommodations, how we ran our communications and our evaluations. The more you can do to create a system and explicitly set that up with students beforehand, the better. Because I guarantee we got overwhelmed with emails, we got overwhelmed with accommodation requests, and we developed processes and then communicated them very clearly with the students. But if you can do that from day one, instead of being chasing and worrying about kind of lost emails and this and that, it will make your life significantly better, significantly better. So that just gives you a sense of some of the things that we did. What I want to talk about now, I'm going to back that up. What I want to talk about now is just some overall findings from the survey that we did. So we asked some questions about generally, how students found the experience, what the context was. Then we went into very specific questions about the tools, their experience of it. We had both kind of, ranking questions and open questions. Now we're going to, next half hour, I think I'll try and run you through both the our own perspectives and the students' responses to things. So before I do that, just take a quick temperature check here. Let's try the raised hand thing, actually. All right, click open your raised hand icon up top, and if everything is working well, click agree. If you'd like the presentation style to change, speak louder, speak softer, speed up, slow down, click one of those. If you've got some other issue that's not working, so don't raise your hand, just click on one of the other icons, either the agree or disagree. Agree means everything's working well. Disagree means it's not working well. And then the other icons you can use to identify how things are going. And then, I think everyone can see this. If you look on the attendees, if you go over the attendees pod there, you can then scroll down and very quickly. So we can see we've got a lot of greens. We don't have any reds. We've got one lapin, which, let me see what a lapin means. Speed up. I assume that's an ironic lapin. And we've got 15 people raising their hands. So that just gives us, we've got one person who's got an issue. Overall, it seems like everyone's in pretty good shape. Okay, so if everyone wants to unclick their icon, that should, yeah, you can see how that goes. So we'll come back to that, but raised hands and those icons can be quite a useful tool just to do a quick temperature check in your classroom. So, all right, so we're good to go. So now let's talk about some of the specifics. First off, COVID challenges faced by students. So again, assume this is the cohort that responded to this was somewhere around 150 students, and about 50 to 60% of them responded each. So what you get in the first graph there is just a question to them. Did you face more, the same, or fewer challenges this spring compared to normally? And what you see is in blue, almost 50%, 46 and 55% in the two classes faced more challenges. So that's not just faced challenges, that's faced more challenges than they would in a normal semester. So just as an underline, this is the context we're dealing with. And the examples that you can see there, I mean, they're really very wide-ranging, from technical issues, my computer literally can't handle the bandwidth, I don't have the bandwidth, to I'm moving, I'm living with my family again, I've got like there are mental health implications, there are domestic safety issues, I've had COVID, my family members have COVID, I've lost my job, my parents have lost their job. They're dealing with a lot. So keep that in mind. Like, I don't think it's going to harm any of us to be extra empathetic and really focus on doing what we can to drive as learning an environment as possible, and maybe worrying a little bit less about focusing on the free riders or the ones who aren't doing the work, and really, just extending empathy to students. So that's one thing. Then we asked them, again, these are just some of the big picture things. Then we said, okay, what's your overall format preference? You took these classes now online. Now imagine everything else were the same except we did them in the classroom. Would you prefer to be in the classroom or would you prefer to be online? And you can see 57 to 65% preferred to be in the classroom, 43 to 35 preferred online. That maps on relatively clearly to I think the U of O polling, which showed about 70% of students would definitely prefer to be in person. The comments in favor of in-person were almost all about pedagogical and social relationship kind of peer-to-peer relationship reasons. Better for learning, better for just feeling connected and concentrating. All of the comments supporting the online, they were about convenience. They were about saving time and money in terms of transportation, being able to live maybe in a different place. A lot of people said in person was, a lot of people had difficult working conditions at home. So, so that's an interesting finding too. I'm going to suggest too that maybe just looking at the chat, maybe we focus as many questions as we can into the Q&A, because the way questions are going to come in right now is they'll come in and then they'll disappear. Whereas if we capture them in the Q&A, it'll be a little bit, they'll have a little bit more longevity. So just a suggestion there. So that's overall format preference. In terms of the students' view of participation opportunities and quality, so we asked them basically, do you think there is more opportunity to participate online versus your experience in person, or quality of, and what's the quality of these opportunities online versus in class? So is it more, the same, or fewer opportunities in online? What you see there is very surprising. It's not surprising in one sense, but it was surprising to us. 70% to 60% felt that there were more opportunities to participate in the online version as we organized it. Now, when you look at the quality of participation, you see a very different story, especially between the third and fourth. Third-year students still said the quality was much better, possibly because this might have been one of the first third-year courses they took, and as such, one of the first more participatory ones, given that first and second year are a bit larger and less participatory. But you see in the fourth year, the ones who are seminar-oriented, they've had some experience with that, they found the quality, fewer found the quality of participation better in the online version. This became really interesting when we then asked them, okay, not just the opportunities that existed, but what kind of opportunity? What was your actual participation like? So we'll talk about that now. But first, I just want to respond to Sylvie's comment. Investing in ergonomics and a sit-stand desk and some decent technology, 100% worth it. It takes time that you probably don't think you have, but boy, teaching standing up. I taught standing. I had 2 courses back to back, so I was teaching for 7 to 8 hours a day, literally on screen for 6 hours plus an hour debrief. So I was 8 hours a day. And even that standing was the way to keep the energy and engage with the class. So, side note, back to participation. So, opportunities and quality in theory, great. When you ask them how much they actually did, and then you get a slightly different story. So, even in the third-year course, then only 35% of students said they engaged more, 35% said they engaged the same, 32 less. So there you've got something quite different. 41 for 42. You had much more of the same. So, it's not clear that it necessarily translated into more engagement from their point of view anyway. Although there's no doubt the chat, Q&A, and breakouts allow for a much greater volume of objectively speaking. So it does allow for more quantity. In terms of the quality, you'll see that a lot of people felt in the third year that they engaged more both more, and the quality was better. Whereas in the fourth year seminar version, they felt that that was not at all. Side note, we came in having a slight hypothesis that maybe we could just do participation without evaluation. We ended up making evaluation participation a fairly significant portion of the grade. I think it was maybe 15%. And I thought that the participation would not be particularly driven by that. But it turns out that you've got 90% of students who said having a participation mark either strongly or moderately influenced their participation. So take that into consideration. We invested a ton of time in evaluating participation. We basically downloaded and read and evaluated each student based on all of their textual interaction in the Q&As, in the full class chat, and in the breakout chats and presentations. But it takes an enormous amount of time, and it was only possible because I had some extra hours with the TA. But I think my takeaway is it would be good to find lighter ways to nonetheless make participation a significant part of the mark, because it did apparently drive interaction from their point of view. So that's kind of the big picture on participation and the context. Now, what I want to talk about is how the tools worked themselves, both from our point of view as instructors and students. So we asked students, how did you find it overall? This isn't compared to an online in-person classroom. This is just, how did you find it? Good, neutral, poor. Very strong results. 65 to 75% of students found that it was that it was good. The lectures, the typical positive comments were lectures were easy to follow. Oops, sorry, my mobile air conditioning unit here is giving me trouble. The lectures were easy to follow. They loved the breakouts. They really enjoyed the participation tools. And they really liked having a live class. They made a huge difference. A lot of them said it really made them feel like they were still in university. And they found it much more orderly than a video conferencing tool with that amount of students. And a lot of them said it was nice not to have to be on video themselves. The negatives were it's a little bit dry, and the chat can be distracting during the lecture because it's hard to figure out what to focus on. Again, you need to manage how the tools work together, but overall, strong thumbs up from students. Fairly strong thumbs up from us as well. I would use it again. The webinar format is great for a large lecture course. It has lots of tools that facilitate high student participation. The tools are easy to use. Content can be, they're internally coherent. They can be downloaded. The material can be downloaded, the chats, etc. We control the participant view, which makes, for large part, which makes a big difference. So we can hide the chat function if we need people to really concentrate, for example. It's very customizable. You can have many different layouts. So this is only one layout. We'll show you a breakout layer later, but there are lots of different ways to organize it. It's easy to have guest lecturers. The negatives, it takes time to learn, but that you're going to do anyway. It has, has a Windows 97 feel user interface, and it's clunky with PowerPoint, although Nancy has told me that there are a bunch of ways to work around for that. You can't share websites internally. You have to use oh, Michael said, okay, there is a pod for websites. All right, well, we'll come back to Michael then. I use the share screen, and then you just share your browser. But Michael, if you want to comment on how you did it, that's great. I'm learning something too. And the other thing is, you need to manage how much material there is on the screen. But that's just a pedagogical question. That's not a limitation. The other thing is it's optimized for computer. It's okay on the iPad and it's terrible on the phone. So depending on students, technical inequalities, it can have a real impact on someone's ability to engage. Then we asked them, okay, not just overall, but how about specific components? So did it work for class lectures? And I won't go over this in any detail because you're seeing it in action here pretty much. But the students found that it was either good or neutral. You know, only 8% of people thought that it wasn't good for class lectures, and that was true in both of my courses. You know, side note, one comment is, yeah, we had bandwidth issues the first couple of weeks because I think Contact North was still getting things up to speed, and we were not able really to give 100 students AV rights at the same time to speak in the breakouts. So we ended up doing everything by text and only used the raised hand and video, audio comments by students sparingly. But honestly, given how much time it takes to do AV questions, the text 108%. Oh no, 8% only. Only 8% of students said that it was poor. So yeah, so there can be bandwidth issues, but I think they've figured that out. So anyway, it's a decent enough tool. Actually it's a very good tool for broadcasting like this. Full 41, 70, 30. Oh yeah. Well, David, it's definitely not going to be the only rounding error that you see. I think that 8 is supposed to be a 0. Actually, I know that it's supposed to be a 0. I think the 8 got copied over from the POL 3102. That said, what can I say? I'm a political theorist who nonetheless loves Excel. So yeah, there's the class lecture takeaway. In terms of the breakouts, so what you can do is, I won't do it right now, but afterwards I'll show you if we have time, which we probably won't, so I will show you right here. What you can do is you can shift to a different view, and then you can break out everyone into individual smaller breakout groups. This is one of the best things about this this program. Students loved it in both of the classes. I mean, they were a little bit less positive on it in 3102, but the qualitative feedback I got back was uniformly good, with 1 or 2 small exceptions. But essentially what you do, and I'll just show you right now. So essentially you switch to a different view. Okay, now you can't see, oh, no, now you can't see me anymore. All right, you can still see the full chat. We've got a new discussion notes panel here, and you can see the PowerPoint piece, but it doesn't look like it's on the right page. I'm not sure if that's true. In any event, then what you do is on the attendees box, you go to the breakout and you can randomly assign people to breakouts, and we can put 180 people into 20 different breakout rooms. You could then, your chat in those rooms will be only with the people in your rooms. You can chat amongst yourselves. You can synthesize your takeaways, the key points you want to discuss, or your key points, your key conclusions in the breakout discussion notes. And then I call everyone back together. We come back to the full class view, which you got to start your video again, but it all eventually comes back. And then what you can do is you can actually share, I'll just give you an example here. You can share either the chat or, more importantly, the notes section that one of the groups had come up with. So if we broke out and breakout 12 had put down 3 or 4 points there, what we do is we bring that up, and either we'd debrief it kind of on that basis, or we'd ask someone from the group who was named as the presenter to raise their hand. We'd give them audio. They'd take us through it, and then we'd close it back out. So that is basically how you do participation. A quick little vision of that. I can't stress it enough. It was a very, very important part of our courses. Students appreciated the change of learning style, the change of pace. They liked the ability to really go deep with fellow classmates. It allowed, a surprising number talked about the fact that it allowed a real connection with colleagues who they then kind of connected with offline, not in person, but through Facebook or whatever. And generally, the discussions were very respectful. That said, you definitely need an explicit discussion in education around the norms of breakout discussion, about active inclusivity, about reflection rather than reaction, about how to manage the pace and volume of the chats and the things. Remember, as with the chat, there's a Twitter effect here. People are used to reacting as opposed to reflecting. Pace and volume is much more of a problem. I mean, it's a problem in person for students dominating, but if someone is a high dominating kind of writer and a quick typer, it really builds up. And we definitely found that we needed to remind people to be more, generally it was great, but we needed to remind people to be careful, especially with the chats. So Nancy, maybe you can answer Christina's. I think they're developing one. We ended up developing our own one, so I've got a 2-page overview of what we shared with our students. Particularly, we were dealing with sensitive political topics, and certainly Black Lives Matter and American politics and Canadian politics and Indigenous issues and ethics. And so it would certainly, you need to take the time. In a seminar, you'll have to navigate that, but most people know what it's like. They're looking at each other face to face. People are careful. The text version, because people are so used to being super informal and using all the different social media and the sensationalism that's built into that, they need to be reminded of what it means to communicate professionally and respectfully here, even though generally 99% of the interactions were very positive. It was necessary, and it helped to explicitly outline expectations and guidelines. And then certainly in the chat, we had the TAs be very they engaged actively to try and snip any things that would kind of spiral. So again, 98% of the time worked fine. The 2% was a question of fine tuning, but it'd be better to do the fine tuning right up front and remind them of this before you get into it. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's on breakouts. In terms of chat, so again, this is something that in terms of, we use chat in the lectures, as you guys are doing. We also use chat in the breakouts. Actually, let me pause for 1 second. Robert just noted something on that last point that's useful to share, which is we also had a conversation up front about preferred pronouns, and the students actually requested that in terms of their usernames, they do last name dot first name and then preferred pronoun, and it had a huge positive impact on people's comfort level. So I'll just throw that out as something that's very easy to do, and immediately communicates a certain open, inclusive respect kind of in the environment that you create. So thanks, Robert. That's Robert Mironov, my TA, who suggested that. Thanks. So everything I've just said about breakouts goes double for chat. In terms of students' responses, they liked it for lectures. It was either vast majority neutral or good. They really liked it in breakouts because obviously there were fewer people using it, so the pace and the volume were kind of easier to follow. From our point of view, it's very positive, but you need to actively manage it. So very positive, but you really need to actively manage it for all of the reasons that we just talked about. So I won't go through all of them, but the positives are it really allowed an enormous volume of interaction. It also gave a ton of voice to people who are not normally comfortable speaking in public. I mean, the participation levels were incredible in terms of almost everyone who was attending was participating to a very significant degree. They can be downloaded, you can mark them. Pauline, we can talk more about it after, but we had a very long and systematic approach, which I would not recommend doing. I think the better way is to find some proxies or an easier way to give credit. Private chat also is surprisingly useful. Students connected between it, students connected to the TAs to discuss issues, logistics, etc. And it really builds rapport between the prof and the student. So even if you just ask a couple of, respond to a couple of questions in that come up on the chat, they really feel like they're talking to you. So Alexandra, question in the Q&A pod. I'm not going to be able to look at those right now. Nancy and Robert are looking, but I think what we're going to do is we're going to respond to as many as we can, but then respond to them possibly afterwards as an FAQ that we that we sent out. The negatives on chat, just to underline, there's a Twitter effect. It can privilege and encourage reaction over reflection, although on the whole we found that people were very reflective. Volume and pace can be overwhelming. It can be distracting as you're lecturing. It can be distracting for students as they're listening. And some students are less sensitive. If you're just used to smashing it out, they just think a little bit less about what they're saying. So you really, 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 really need to help educate them about how to do it. And we found, with the exception of one, we only had one case out of 150 students, and that was a case that would have been a very difficult case, even live. Other than them, the class took feedback and reacted incredibly well. The one other thing I would suggest is the making use of closing and opening the chat. So I know some of you are chatting there, but let me show this. I'm just going to hide this. So sometimes I'll say, okay, I need you guys to focus on the PowerPoint or on this discussion question. So I'm going to close the chat. Hold your thoughts. Let's just focus here. And we really went over something in quite detail, and then I'll maybe continue that train of thought to get everyone back on, and then I'll say, okay, now we'll bring the chat back, and it takes a second or two, but you just you can't see what I'm doing, but you just click the new chat or the old chat back, and then you bring it back into the class and just kind of click it back where it was. So hopefully that makes sense. You really need someone monitoring it, unless you've got a much smaller class. I was going to run through a few different ways that I use chat. One way is that I would pose a specific question. So sometimes I just let it go and have students chatting between themselves and with the TAs, as you guys are doing. Sometimes I would ask a specific question, content question, and kind of pose it. Okay, so what do you think about, tell me one word that defined politics for you. And you'd have 75 students type in their answer, and it would just stream. Right, democracy, power, control, working together, coordination, optimism, cynicism, etc., etc. So that's a great way of getting a ton of material, and then you can riff off it in your responses. Another way is just to say, okay, I'm going to give you a question. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to discuss it amongst yourselves. So I'd say, okay, what's your one word for politics? And I'd let them just go and engage with it. So that would, that's another way. But it is very valuable to be active in terms of the leaving it open and closing and using it quite consciously. So regardless of what kind of platform you're on, just treating chat like another, I hate this language, another channel. It's another mode of interacting, and it's great because it opens up opportunities. But as we all know, when you're focusing on one thing, your attention dials back on everything else. So just experiment with the chat and don't be afraid to turn it off and then to bring it back in. Because when you really want students to focus, it's hard. It's hard if you've also got a lot of commentary running through there. So, but quickly, yes, Jennifer, you are able to drop in and contribute to breakout room discussions. We didn't because there were just too many and we want to give them space. But yeah, you can move between all of them. So I would always start off by checking in with all of them and then let them do their own thing. Okay, got to keep going here because we're about, there's still a lot more material to get through and we want to have some Q&A as well. The Q&A pod, like I said, it is the advantage of the Q&A pod is that you've got them all there and you can decide how to engage with the questions. Basically, I'll show you two different ways. So I'm going to open up a question randomly. It's from Willow. Hey, Willow. Willow asks, are there still concerns about Adobe Connect and our students in China? Can they access this platform from China? Oh, that's a great question about which I have no idea. I'm assuming Nancy has an answer for that. So what I'm going to suggest, Nancy, is that you don't have to, but I'm giving you an example. I would say, Nancy, do you want to take a look at that question when you have a chance and just jot a note to everyone in the class about about what the correct answer is. Nancy will. So what I'll do is I'll do this. I'll type in a quick response. And now under Willow's question, which is the fifth or sixth one, you can see you will all have received a response from us, which is Nancy will respond, thanks. And then Nancy could respond that. So the point is, you can either pick questions and then verbally respond to them, or you can respond to them individually or to the entire group in a written form. The other advantage of this is they don't get lost, and you can do it after class too. So you can respond to them all, and then they're there at the beginning of next class. So students can come 5 minutes early, and they can read through those questions, or you can turn them into a Q&A and put them on Brightspace or a variety of things. Yeah, that's the Q&A pod. Yeah, so that you can show 2 different PowerPoints at the same time. You can make as many screen shares as you want. So it takes discipline to use, but it's totally worth it. And the students really appreciate it. You can see in the numbers there, they really love the content in both classes, because you can pose thoughtful questions. And in my case, Robert and Jocelyn mostly then had content answers, which then got shared. We also used it for logistics, but for the content stuff, it really allowed students to get a sense of what their peers were thinking and engage in a less kind of time-stressed way than in the chats. So highly recommend using that. Polls, another great tool. Students loved it. 90% to 95% of students loved it. There were a few students who said, oh, they were maybe used them too much. But honestly, it changed the pace. You get a ton of feedback right away. So you can use them for logistical stuff. Did you read the syllabus? Do you understand this issue? Which of these things do you want more information about? We use that extensively in the first couple of weeks to clarify expectations. All the way to, again, content. You could say which of these words is most appropriate, most defines your view of politics, and list 10. And then you get the answers, you share the results as we did at the beginning, and students have this great jumping off point. Say, okay, well, let's see, 20% of you said this. Someone who said that, put up their hand, tell us about that. Hand goes up, you give them the audio, they explain it, you turn it off, you riff on it, and then you can take someone else. So it's an incredibly interactive way to get a ton of aggregate feedback, and the students, and I loved it too. And we made them kind of informal and fun often, and so it really energized the class. Using the raised hands, we already tried that. The one thing, again, students generally found it worked pretty well. Only 3 or 0% felt it didn't work at all. The key here, however, is that it takes time, regardless of the platform, but especially of this, it takes a lot of time to get students. So you want someone to present, it takes like a minute of logistics, literally a minute of logistics. You have to give them audio and video authorization. They have to turn it on. It has to boot up. It has to, bandwidth has to get it here. You have to, okay, are you all right, right? That's like 35, 45 seconds. They make their point, and then we have to shut it down. We have to do it. So it doesn't sound like much. But if you have a 3-hour class, and let's say you're going to have 50 questions over the course of it, that's literally a third of your time taken up in logistics, and questions. So we really found that it was easier to do mostly text. But yeah, actually, does someone want to raise their hand? Cousinage, I'm sorry, I'm not pronouncing your. Do you want to raise your hand, and I'll give you audio, and I'll just to show what it's like. So now I've said, okay. Are you there, Cousinage? All right, let me see if we're there. All right, there we go. So that's 30 seconds right there. I'm going to give you audio. All right, now you've got audio. You have to turn on your audio now. So go to the top where there should be a microphone button. Click on Connect. Are you working on that? Kusanaj. If you want to text us to let us know if you're working on that. Your mic is not working, so you probably have to go click on the mic button. You have to click on the arrow and then select microphone, perhaps. No, Najid. No, not you. So, Kusanaj, I'm assuming that it's not working. This is the authentic experience. So that's 3 minutes right there. Yeah, so just take that into account. The upside is that students are super comfortable with text-based interactions, and they prefer it much more. So if we say, all right, we're going to lose a little bit of the public speaking skills training, but we're going to work on the text part of things, you know, it's a fair trade-off. So that's what I would say about that. On the other hand, the other icons are pretty good. You know, no one's going to have a microphone right now because none of you have microphone authorization. So it's only when when the host clicks on microphone authorization, it'll pop up. So like I said, webinar, not video conferencing. But trust me, with 100 students, it's very useful not to, like with 100 people, there's always 7 people who have the microphone on in the background. You hear the hairdryer, or they go to the bathroom, or I mean, it's, you know, we're living in our private lives. So this has got some definite advantages. Okay, now I just want to talk about the notes pod. So again, I brought this out before. We had originally thought we would do a lot of PowerPoint for every class. I did it for a couple of classes, and then it just proved too inflexible. So unless you're really doing broadcast stuff, we ended up using this little very simple text box, presenter notes, to put up the agenda, to write questions for the breakouts, to synthesize key findings as we were doing it. I'll give you so this, you know, we might do something like this. You know, we might, I mean, this is a very small version of it, but you might have like an agenda, and you might then have, you know, key questions to be discussed later, and we might just keep track of it. One of the TAs might just keep track of it on the side, and then you pull it in into the full view. Often, instead of a PowerPoint, we would just have a larger text box basically there, and we'd engage in it with real time. So we basically used it like a Blackboard, only just textual. Because the internal whiteboard function in Adobe Connect really is not worth its weight in chalk. So that was the one disappointment, is that I thought we'd be using that a lot to kind of scribble notes and write. It's not nearly as good. So anyway, we used them both in lectures, and you can see that students were fine with them. No one said, geez, I really wish you had fancier PowerPoint documents. And students really liked them in breakouts. It was a great tool to do that. And yes, Carla, you can prepare all your stuff before. So you can build the classrooms, you can upload your documents, you can set up your PowerPoint, you can fill out a note pod like that with all of your comments and bring it in and leave it up there. You can set up all your polls, etc. It's one of the major advantages of Adobe Connect for me. Again, there are bandwidth issues, so they don't want you spending too much time on it when you're not teaching, but I think that's been more resolved, and that was a huge benefit for us as compared to, you know, Zoom isn't there unless you're there. So from our point of view, I'm not going to go over this, but it was very useful. So it's a good tool. Yeah. So Robert, when it's more text based, I mean, I've talked to my neighbor is a computer science guy from Carleton, and he's like, no, I don't just need a little whiteboard. I need a big blackboard because I need to trace all of these things. So he, you know, he's buying a blackboard and putting it behind him, and he's going to literally do it, you know, write on it by hand, let them see there, and then engage there. There are other tools that you can use to do that. I just would say that the internal whiteboard one is not great. Check it out, but you know, that's our experience anyways. Maybe Nancy knows some better workarounds, but we didn't find them super useful. Now the whiteboards do engage, like you can have a whiteboard where students engage too, but the lag, huge lags, especially once a bunch of students start engaging. But yeah, you could definitely use a blank PDF. You could use, because you can write on the PowerPoint too. So you can do all of that. If you have an iPad, you can use, you can sign in as a second iPad, turn it into your host, and use that as a writing tool. But the writing tool is just not that great. That's the only problem. So I would kind of, find different ways to work it out, and you guys probably have better ideas than that. So that's just one thing there. I wouldn't count on the whiteboard. Another thing we did, which we loved, and Robert and Jocelyn had a great time doing, and students really appreciated, was we did voluntary virtual discussion groups. We used to do these all the time in first and second year. Then they became disallowed for purely administrative and logistical spacing reasons. Now you can do, I wouldn't make them mandatory because they have to be in the class schedule, but we did voluntary ones. And the students who wanted to loved them, right? Not everyone showed up, but about 30% of the course showed up for the two discussion groups. And it was a huge driver of student engagement, both with the TAs and with each other. So I would highly, highly recommend doing this. We just did it over Zoom. The TAs ran it. I came for only one. It was student driven. It was basically just like the TAs aren't going to prep anything. They're just going to respond and help facilitate. But it's a chance for you guys to really engage in a seminar format. We just chose a time. So some people couldn't meet them, Paul. Like some people couldn't make it. But because it was voluntary, they weren't being penalized for that. And there's only so much you can do. I guess what we probably could have done is we had the same time each week. What we probably should have done, now that I think about it, is have a different time each week so that people with different schedules could work them. But we did it on a Friday where it was less likely, Friday afternoon where it was less likely the date of classes. So anyway, yeah, Agnes, I would do them myself, right? Even if I didn't have TAs, I would put in an extra hour of teaching because it was so important for the students. And it was really the students that cared and really wanted content. So I would highly recommend that. And it's one of the things that doing stuff remotely allows. I'm going to do this always now with my normal classes too. So even when we're back in line, I will probably use a chat poll function once in a while. Like I'll bring it out every class I'll say, okay, open up your computers, let's do a poll on this or that. And I will definitely do voluntary virtual DGs. They really, yeah, Paul, I don't have experience on that. So I'm just going to keep it to the live ones anyway. Evaluation. So a couple more things. I just want to talk about now evaluations and communications. It's boring, but it also is a huge driver of overwhelming work or manageable work. So as I said up front, I was very skeptical about Brightspace because I find Brightspace is organized. I mean, it was designed for MOOCs, and it's not great for smaller social sciences type feedback, et cetera, et cetera. So I was very skeptical about it, and I didn't love the gradebook function, which is super clunky and everything else. That said, Jillian Steele from TLSS said, Paul, I know you're skeptical, you got good reasons, there are limitations, but trust me, trying to create a workaround where you and your TAs are using Google Sheets and sending emails with huge attachments back and forth and doing stuff with your own templates, and then it is going to be terrible. Side note, yes, Agnes, I have done no research for 4 months, basically. That's the trade-off. And my partner has been incredibly understanding in terms of supporting the work-life imbalance. So yeah, so this is, you gotta take those things into account. My personal choice was I'm a full prof. I don't need to worry about promotions, etc. And I love teaching, so I felt like I wanted to give these students the best experience they could have, even if it was challenging for me and my family, because the situation was hard, and I knew that students were going to be going through very hard things, and I wanted them to have a good experience with this. But as I'll end with at the end, I'm not sure I would run it exactly the way I did putting in the same amount of energy marking participation, for example. There are other ways probably to work a bit smarter on some of the things than we did. So I can mention those in the back. Anyway, one of the huge time savers is learning, if you haven't already, to use Gradebook on Brightspace. Take the time to work with someone from TLS because they can help you basically abuse it into a shape that works for you. So there are workarounds. You can use certain functions to do other things, even if it's not ideally suited for your purposes. And Jillian and others have been invaluable in basically saying, okay, so what do you want to do? All right, let's try this tool. So they don't have a survey tool, but they have quizzes. And it's not easy to necessarily create a survey through a quiz because you have to give grading points and stuff like that, but you can do it if you know how to work it. That turned out to be invaluable for us. The Gradebook is a pain to set up and it's not intuitive, but once you get it set up, stuff flows automatically into it, more or less. There's always little tweaks and tricks there. But it is really worth learning it and trying to twist it so that it works for you. And we managed to make it work for us. Working with 3 TAs and, between 100 and 150 students, it was a game changer in terms of I didn't like having to shift all my, kind of norms and tendencies. I'm a big Excel spreadsheet guy and Google Sheets guy, but, I shifted and it really worked. So Gradebook is worth investing creating rubrics takes time. I've used rubrics for probably 15 years now, but I always create them myself and then do it by hand usually. The rubrics in Brightspace are limited in a variety of ways, but Jillian helped me to basically do everything that I wanted to. And those rubrics not only were marking, but they allowed enormous amount of feedback. And you can see what happened. The results were incredibly positive. So 86 and 80% of the students found the rubric feedback helpful, and another 15 and 18 found it, neutral. Only 6 or 5% found it unhelpful. That's pretty surprising. I'm going to show you 2 of them. So it saves. It's upfront work, but it saves a ton of time doing the marking. It allows a coordination between TAs and profs in a much, much better way. They can do the preliminary, then I can go in and they literally click on the feedbacks, they write their comments, or you can record verbal comments, which I did sometimes. I could then go back and I could read it and I could calibrate it and I could, pop the grades up and down a little bit depending on what worked. We used a combination of a Google spreadsheet to keep track of, especially where TA said, yeah, I'm not sure about this one. Can you definitely look at that one? So we got into a rhythm. But then I could adjust the rubric and the feedback, and boom, then you hit publish, and it goes. The feedback goes to the students, and the grade goes to the Gradebook. So you can. It's really worth. Spending the time on it. So I'll just give you 2 examples. You won't be able to see them very well, but I'll give you an example of what they look like. So it's too small, but when you get the PowerPoint, you'll be able to expand it and see it. This is a simple rubric I have. So these are for syntheses, that basically critical summaries of readings that they hand in each week. 2-3 pages long is the assignment. And so we basically click on a mark at the top, and then we have about 10 to a dozen typical comments about what students need to do more of or less of. And so we'll click on the mark, and then we'll click on each of the types of potential feedback. Well, the categories are, it depends obviously, Tom, on your field. The categories on top are A+, through F. And what's underneath is the feedback. It's not a marking tool. It's a tool to say, oh, here's what you didn't do. You didn't include the correct theorist, or you could have added more of your own critical commentary, or could you focus on the research question a little bit more. And so there we just clicked on the right-hand column. It's either recommended or not appropriate. And if it's not applicable, it means you're already doing it well. And if it's recommended, so that's a way they get the mark, but then they also get kind of some feedback. And then there's also a text box where you can give more specific feedback, which we would usually give a couple of sentences as well. A slightly more complicated, sophisticated version is for responses, for evaluations of their their reflection journal. And then at the top, which you can't see, we had a grade and then 3 types of content feedback. And then we had feedback on form. And then we had at the end, here's some ideas of how you might make it better. So you could click on those 2 and then add in your own specific commentaries. I'm going to tell you, it saves a ton of time. It also focuses you on marking for the categories that you believe are important, because you have to really think about what you're looking for, both marking-wise and feedback-wise. You can still add your own, and with TAs, it's incredibly useful. I'll just leave it at that. I can talk for days on end about rubrics, but I'll say it's worth. It was a pain to get them into. Jillian really helped me with that. It's worth the work. One other thing about evaluations is that we use self-evaluations too. We use self-evaluation quizzes about participation. And that was used as a data point that we mixed into our final participation mark, but also as a way of calibrating between us and them. And so students that had really wildly unrealistic self-evaluations, we reached out to and said, yeah, this is not, you're not at an A++ level. You're more about like this. So, it helped catch those things up front very quickly, and was really useful. The written assignments, we used both to get an idea of that, like are there people with unrealistic expectations who we really have to reach out to, but also more importantly, we asked them if there were any, it was just two questions. 1, what grade would you give yourself? And 2, were there challenges that you faced beyond the normal ones or beyond ones that we've already made accommodations for? And if so, B, what were they? So we used that as a way of, given COVID, from week to week, tracking students that might have had issues that might not have reached out to us to say, look, I've got a real problem here. Can you help me? And probably each week there were 3 or 4 people every week that hadn't reached out to us that we then contacted proactively to see if there was something we could do to help with their situation, and that impacted slightly, that led us to an accommodation of one sort or another that was fair, right? So very useful. In terms of, what would I replace our marking with self-evaluation? So we were wondering about whether we could do that with participation, for example. Interestingly, in our quick analysis, overestimators, the kind of free riders, overconfident ones, were about 15% of the class, but underestimators were the large bulk, so 50%. We didn't do an analysis to see whether it mapped onto gender issues or ethnicity or race or anything like that, or year of program. But our takeaway was we would not probably rely on self-evaluations, less because of worrying about policing the overconfident ones, but more because of worrying about penalizing the underestimators. 2 last slides on communications, and then we'll try and open up to a bit more Q&A, and those who can stay on for longer, we're more than happy to stay on longer. Communications, again, a boring but absolutely essential part of teaching online, because all of your interaction is going to be mediated, and it can be completely overwhelming, both in terms of the communicating to them and accommodation requests. So just a couple of comments here. It basically took us 2 weeks to clarify the syllabus, and it was a super detailed syllabus. So it's 35 pages long. We tried to put in everything you could possibly think about. We weren't successful, but it was a huge amount of work that we put into it. So 92 and 85% of students said that they had read the syllabus within the first week, but our experience was deep into the second week. And bear in mind that with a spring course, that's into your week 3.5 or 4 in normal teaching. You still had students, not only you had late arrivers, but you still had students who hadn't properly integrated it. So they had read the syllabus, but it took a lot of time to integrate it. So put work into the syllabus, but repeat. Like, you just have to say everything way more than you do. And yeah, Tansy, a Brightspace FAQ question is a great idea. We put those up too. Students who were engaged read it, those who didn't, and then they'd be asking questions in class, and you'd eat up 15 to 20 minutes of logistics class. So of logistics every class. So what we ended up doing is I love the idea of either having an FAQ specific, or we would put FAQs in an announcement. So we ended up using, to broadcast, we ended up using Brightspace announcements exclusively. We said to students, don't expect emails, don't expect us to, kind of be spoon feeding you everything logistically in class, although we did. We said, we are going to send out announcements, and you are responsible for every single thing in there. So if there's something in the announcement that was not talked about in class, and it says, here's the date for the due date, and you come and you say, oh, well, I didn't read it, it doesn't matter. You are not going to get accommodation for that. You are responsible. They get notifications every time an announcement comes up if they've got the Pulse app on their phones. They can check it every day. That is the way that we communicated with them, and for the large part, that's the broadcast. For the receiving, students absolutely want to use email. We tried a few different things. I don't think there's any way around email. The one thing I would say is create a system and a structure. We had one TA who was responsible in each class for receiving them, although I was always copied. And then we triaged it. Anything that the TAs could deal with, they deal with. Anything they needed from me, we'd talk every 2 days, and we'd get decisions, and then they'd respond. And then invariably, I would get some, and I would have to respond to some. But that's also because we learned as we went along. But I would set up a communication strategy, make it 100% clear in the syllabus, and really don't deviate from it if you can, because it's a massive undertaking. The other thing is we were going to get way more accommodation requests. So create a spreadsheet and a system for dealing with them, and you will get you get the SAS accommodations. Those are easy to deal with at the beginning. You list them, you kind of reach out, and you assign what's how you're going to work it. But it was my dad got COVID. He's been in the hospital for 3 days. I've had to take care of my 7-year-old sister. I couldn't do it. So those things are the type of things that we just had way more than normal. So expect them, create a system, and it's easy to forget them, right? So it's really important to create a system. Whether you can do it in Gradebook, you can create columns where you can track those things. We tracked them in a Google Sheets so that the TAs and I could all add them, and then we would go back to them. But whatever your system is, make sure it's a system, because it's so easy. It's so easy to miss things, and for students to just not to get it covered. Okay, 2 last slides, and then I'm finally done. Hopefully we can go to Q&A. One other thing on communications, and we normally don't have to do this, but I think it's good practice anyway. I do it when I team build in other contexts, and I would say set the ethos. So you're going to have an unusually high level of stress among students and your TAs, and probably yourself. And it's going to, I can't imagine it's not going to get worse again with schools reopening, etc. It's almost certain. I mean, I might be wrong, but I'd say 99% of you are going to have to tweak the course and your tools as you go along, given the environment, changing context, and as you learn. If you expect that, and if you tell your students to expect that, if you plan for it, and if you encourage them, and you yourself adopt, it sounds a little cheesy, but it's super important, adopt a mindset or an attitude that helps us remember that we're dealing with challenging times, and we're going to have to make accommodations, all of us, them for us for them. What we think is going to work, won't work. What we think won't work might work. So we just shared with them, thanks, Susie. We just shared with them, we said, look, our ethos in terms of teaching this is the 4 E's. I just made it up. Right? Extrapolate, experiment, evaluate, evolve. And we basically said, look, we extrapolated what we think we would work from online courses and some, kind of discussion of distance learning literature. We're going to experiment with different things. We're going to evaluate which ones work, and then we're going to evolve the course. And that means the syllabus and the course is going to be perpetually evolving throughout the course. It's not a legally set contract. It is a working document that helps describe how we're working together at any one time. That was really important. The other thing that was really important was, I think anyway, was saying, here's the mindset we're going to adopt. We invite you to do the same. We're going to try and be patient instead of impatient with technological issues, with, kind of our fellow students, with everything else. We're going to try and keep things in perspective. We're incredibly lucky to be here teaching and studying in this emergency. We're going to try and be curious as opposed to judgmental. We're going to try and be generous as opposed to kind of miserly and selfish. We're going to try and focus on the positive when we can to kind of take from it what we can, but we're going to give really productive feedback to one another to help make it better without feeling defensive or aggressive. So I would invite you to do the same thing. Work up your own philosophy or ethos and share it with your students up front. As you can see, 80 to 90% of students, which is amazing, found it helpful, which you usually don't hear from kind of soft skills kickoff stuff. So I would really encourage you to do that. Last thoughts. It's not particularly summarizing, but was it worth it? Was it worth the effort to create a high participation online class environment? Absolutely. Students embraced the participation opportunities far more than we expected. Their learning outcomes were far, far superior to what we anticipated, and the appreciation of it was really humbling. Like many said that being able to participate in this way so fully made them really feel like they were still in class, in school with their instructors and peers, and that it really helped them. I mean, in a minor way, but helped them enjoy what was an otherwise hard period of time. Would I use Adobe Connect to teach again? Absolutely, for a large lecture course, especially now that I know it. Probably not for a small seminar course. I'd probably use Zoom for a small seminar and then external tools. But I'd probably also be open to experimenting with the format. Like maybe each week I do one recorded lecture podcast, posted on Brightspace, maybe a live lecture on Adobe Connect with engagement, and then a voluntary virtual discussion group, something like that, which would preserve significant participation opportunities, but then also allow more flexibility for students' schedules and reduce screen fatigue. See you, Lachlan. And then finally, decide whether you're going to record and share your lectures, and then do it systematically. There's some issues around it, basically different options, but definitely take the time to learn the back-end system of Adobe Connect of the recording. It's easy to record, but then you need to go into a different sign-in with Contact North to kind of edit and then make available or not available those videos. So take the time to do that. Pascal, for 25 students, if you're running it as a seminar, I would use a video conferencing tool, not Adobe Connect. Yeah, that's just a quick question. Okay, that's finally it from me. Almost came in at an hour and a half, although apologies for not getting the Q&A under an hour and a half. But that's what I've got to say. We're at 2:34. I'm happy, and I know that Jocelyn, Robert, and Nancy are happy to stick around for Q&A. But maybe what we'll say is we'll take a 1-minute pause, say goodbye to those who need to sign off for other things. Thank you very much for your kind feedback. We'll send back a video recording of this, as well as the PowerPoint, maybe a tweaked version of the synthesis document and my syllabi, or at least one of the syllabus. And yeah, so we'll wait for a minute or two, and then we'll maybe take some questions from folks and try and do Q&A. I think we'll maybe get you guys to wait for a minute or two, and then use the chat.
Well, if I can just jump in and just want to thank you officially and ask people to join me in applauding you and thanking you. So you've learned about those little icons. So before you leave, if you click the one that says applause, that would be great. And we'll be sticking around and waiting for extra questions. Good, people are listening and they're applauding. Super. Thank you so much, Paul. And we're still there for people that have more questions.